Welcome to CERT Rodeo in a Box, a training module to help you develop and further your skills as a CERT volunteer. As part of a CERT team, one of the first jobs you may be called upon to do is assess the damage and conditions of your community following a disaster. In order for the information to be of value, your reports need to be clear, concise, and correct, using the proper standards of measurement. This course, excerpted from our own CERT Rodeo, will provide you with the basics of damage assessments and provide you with the tools to engage in your own discussions and explore several scenarios on your own.
Hello there. This class is Damage Assessment. My name is Rebecca Foote, and I have 25 years experience doing damage assessment for American Red Cross and other organizations. I hope today to be able to share some of that knowledge with you. During this class, we want you to get to know your role as CERT, the importance of a good damage assessment, the phases, how to do it, and the forms. So the question is, what is a disaster? The key words in the definition are sudden, calamitous, and disrupts the functioning of a community. It exceeds a community's ability to respond and cope using its own resources. There are two types of disasters, man-made and natural, and generally, as a CERT, you will not be asked to respond to man-made disasters. So today, we're only going to talk about the natural disasters that occur around our country. The impact on a community's ability to respond. What would you think if you looked out your window and saw this? You can clearly see the path of that tornado. Inside the path, everything was devastated. Just on either side, everything was fine. So within that path, the community's ability to respond was sorely tested. This path was actually Oklahoma in 1999. So disasters have a lot of effects on communities. It disrupts communication, transportation and the ability to respond, structures and the sense of community, utilities, and it increases danger to public health. On communication, 911 systems quickly become overloaded. Frequently, the first indication that a disaster has happened is all of the calls coming into the 911 system. Once it gets overloaded, the victims are unable to call for help. Have you ever had your cell phone give you the message, this call cannot be completed, just because there's not enough bandwidth to put everything through there? So imagine if you're a responder in the field or someone who was out there and saw it happen and you want to report it. The communication system really is something that's harder and harder to rely upon. This is a cell tower. That cell tower is not passing very many calls after the tornado went by. Transportation. Transportation is more than just putting packages on a cart or a truck. You cannot assess the damage accurately. The ambulances and the fire trucks and the police have trouble getting around, and it is tough to evacuate. This is more Oklahoma. That police car is not going to be able to respond to any of the calls. Jamestown, Colorado, the same thing. And the people who were stuck on this bridge are not having any luck in evacuating their area. It is tough to see how you would ever be able to get police, fire, and ambulance through the congestion here on this highway. This is what happened at Moore, Oklahoma, Highway 35, a main artery up and down the United States. How would you ever get ambulances and fire trucks in or even victims out on this road? It's simply just not possible. This was in the recent flooding in Colorado. And this was the traffic jam that formed very quickly after the Virginia earthquake in 2011. Everybody trying to leave all at the same time to get home and find out if everything's okay. Damage to structures. Hospitals are frequently damaged. And then there's also the increase of damage from falling debris depending upon the disaster. And if you are a sheltering organization, When you have a big disaster and you have a lot of homeless, you have organizations like the American Red Cross and the Salvation Army and some of the others, they're looking for places to set up shelters. If you just have something come through, you've just eliminated at least a few of your shelters. The hospital in Joplin, Missouri, destroyed by the tornado. They had to set up a triage hospital in the parking lot. Some people were taken to hospitals that were just a couple miles away, but a large number of people had to be taken to Springfield, Missouri, which was 70 miles from Joplin. Hospital at Moore, Oklahoma, also hit by that large tornado. Utilities, you just don't even think about it. Everything we do now rely on electricity. And then when you have water, natural gas, or electricity outages, you also have other problems. The water supply may not be able to run. You cannot keep food and medicines cold, and you're unable to prepare food except for just out of a package. This electrical tower was destroyed by a tornado, and when it went down, so did the electrical lines with it. This is an overloaded sewer in Colorado. What you see coming out of this sewer is not just water. It is everything that was in that sewer. You are seeing petroleum products and gasoline and everything else that is in the line of that water. Do not go into floodwaters if you can possibly avoid it. And if you do, make sure you rinse off when you come out. Keep this picture in your mind. Hydroelectric dams, when this one went down, it's going to be a long time before it's going to be ready to produce power again. And it doesn't take much water to create an issue with electricity. And it's a fact of life that around our world and around our country are nuclear facilities. And as we have seen in Japan, they are subject to damage, and then they become a danger to public health. The recent Colorado floods, their first estimate on damage was, of course, very high, $48 million. This is where you are going to come in as CERT. You are the person who are going to go out there and determine if things are destroyed, major or minor, if commercial buildings are available, and if bridges and roads are open. So what is a damage assessment? It's an early on effort to gather all of the information that the people in charge need to know to assess the size and the impact. They need to know what they're going to need in order to respond appropriately, and they need to be able to start their request for federal funding. Without your damage assessment, this cannot happen. Let's start with a small contact and then we'll build up to the big ones. The first contact may be simply you calling 911 and your CERT coordinator saying, you know what, I just looked out my window, we had 3 inches of ice last night and my roads are closed. That could be as simple as that. Or it could be your coordinator calling you and saying, we're seeing that a tornado went through kind of your area of town. Are you impacted? What do you see out your window? Are the lights working? Are the signals working? Do you see fires? Do you see trees down? Something may have happened just in your facility. If you are at home and you see something happening, you may want to call your CERT coordinator and report as well. Remember, you have to be able to give directions when there is nothing to use as a landmark. There is no longer that big white house on the corner. Now that we have GPS, it's a whole lot simpler. But if I was to come to this thing, I would just get the name of the housing area and just say, all gone, totally destroyed, no question about it. You might look out your window and see something like this. This would be electrical down, and it could be down in your yard. In large-scale disasters, damage assessments are frequently done from the air. It is really the only true way to get complete and total idea of how large this area might be. This particular photo is of Katrina, so this would be New Orleans. So you, as a CERT, will be doing the windshield damage assessment, also known as the preliminary damage assessment or the PDA. It is done by first responders, and it is the first step in gathering information. And the windshield damage assessment is just exactly that. You are driving down the road in the area to which you have been assigned. You will make a note of the type of the building, the extent of the damage. You'll note whether or not roads are open or closed. You'll notice whether or not utility poles are up, are street lights working, fire plugs, street signs. You'll also be on the lookout for fires and natural gas leaks. All of this is reported on the windshield damage assessment. You will also report on the status of public areas, focusing on structural damage. Public parks are frequently used as a triage point or a gathering point for other organizations, so it is important to know whether or not those parks are available. The localized damage assessment is where we get the real in-depth detail. This would be a walking damage assessment with you making special notes on your forms. You may be assigned to deal only with private property or businesses or public property. Residential damage assessment is something that generally CERTs do not do too much on their own unless requested. We do frequently work with representatives from the Red Cross. So let's look at the types of damage that we will be reporting. Major, minor, and destroyed are generally the most common. Here you can see a house that the damage was just on this one end. I'm sure that there's other damage inside of that structure that was caused when the walls gave way. We as CERTs do not care about what happened inside. We want to look at that structure and its viability. Businesses in other parts of the infrastructure are also assessed. We saw in the previous slides where the police and the fire and ambulance were impacted by that disaster. We need to know, are they still functioning? And if not, we need to kind of get an idea of how long it's going to take for them to be able to function. Businesses are flooded just as frequently as anyone else. This business was impacted by an earthquake. In this case, we would want to talk to the business owner to ask him how long he thinks it will be before he can be back in business. When people are working, they then have the money to start their recovery. And sometimes local communities are very heavily impacted by disasters. This is Greensburg, Kansas, where they have the largest man-dug well in the world. It brings over 3 million visitors per year to this little city. So it was out of service for about 5 years. And then that impacted the community because of all of the lost income. When we are working or we are walking around, our brain automatically does a lot of filtering. And it is important for you as a damage assessment person to be able to turn off those filters and really see what you are seeing. What do you see in this picture? What story is it telling you? I see a water main break that blew all sorts of debris into the yard and also took the shingles off of a roof. Can you see the cat in this photo? There he is. You see him now? How about this one? Can you see this cat? There he is, removing the filter so that you can really see. How about the face in the beans? Can you find him? So what does this photo tell you? This is a photo from Greensburg, Kansas. We know that 95% of that city was destroyed. But when I'm looking at this picture, I'm getting another story. And what I am seeing is that this particular house was not impacted. The trees still have leaves. There might be a little bit of debris blown into the yard, but for the most part, this house made it unscathed. This is Colorado. Take a look at the house in the back. Does it look like it's all right? Look at the bottom of the railing around the front porch. Can you see the debris that is there? And although the little hanging baskets are still there and they look fine, If you look closely at this house, you will see that it is leaning. So with the debris in the porch railing and the fact that the house is leaning, I know that this water in this little stream that's right in front of it was high enough that it started pushing this house off of the porch. This house would be reported as destroyed. You can also see in the foreground a large pile of rock and sediment. What probably happened is that as this stream came around the little brown house, it started kind of an eddy or whirlpool and dumped all of that debris right there. So the little brown house probably is destroyed as well. So look at what you're seeing, make note of every little bitty thing, and it will tell you a lot. So how much damage is too much? In order to determine the extent, we need some consistent measurements and terminology. And when you're doing your damage assessment, if there's any question about the rating, always use the higher rating. We are not insurance adjusters. We just are trying to get an idea of how bad things might be. So the damage assessment categories: destroyed, major, minor, and affected. This sheet shows the general assessment criteria and gives you some ideas and guidelines on how to rate them. It also at the bottom will give you some information that's very handy, such as the fact that doorknobs are 36 inches above the floor. Brick is usually 2.5 inches per run. Siding is either 4 inches or 8 inches depending upon the brand. Keeping all of this in mind will help you in your determination. So to be destroyed, the house or the structure is no longer there, or it is damaged to such an extent that repair is not feasible, or the 2 or more of the major structural components have failed. Greensburg, Kansas. As we can see where that tornado did hit, it took everything. It's very easy to go in there and rate the damage assessment. Flash flood. The house is clearly moved off its foundation. This house was in Colorado, and if you look right at the bottom of the bay window that is there, you will see a flood line. So the water was up that high in the house before all of the water started undermining it. So with it being that high and going as fast as it is, this house was probably rated destroyed even before the underpinning started going. This house, kind of from the front, it looks like, well, maybe the major walls are still standing, until you look at the back and you see that there is really nothing there. So definitely this house would also be called destroyed. On a major damage, there's significant damage and it is currently unusable, but it can be repaired. However, repairs will take more than 30 days. It is also considered major if there was water inside the structure. Hotel in Alabama from Hurricane Katrina. Severe wind and water damage. It took them 5 years to bring this hotel back up to a working order. This house standing in water. Whether or not it is major or destroyed will depend on a couple of variables. How fast this water was moving, how long this water would be standing in the house, and also what contaminants might be in this water. All of those would contribute to rating this destroyed rather than major. Some people might call this one destroyed. I look at it and I see a house that appears to still be straight on its foundation. I still see some windows. I see part of a roof missing, but roofs can be replaced. I would have rated this one as major. Then you come up with minor, and believe it or not, minor is generally the most common. A structure is not habitable. However, in less than 30 days, it can be made so. This house is minor. There are some windows missing, probably some shingles missing on the roof, but it is quite usable. On this house, I would have to question whether or not this damage was pre-existing. When you look at the roof where you have shingles that are missing, if it has been newly missing, the shingles underneath would be darker because they have not been exposed to the sun. So you will have to look around to see if you see shingles that match the roof shingles laying around, or if you see the dark spots. Otherwise, you might just have to say, well, sorry, but this was all pre-existing. Affected, you have slight damage but not really serious, or you're unable to approach the structure because of surrounding conditions. Minimal damage and is habitable without repairs. By habitable, we mean safe, secure, and sanitary. All windows and doors, all utilities able to function. This house is missing some siding. If you get one of those infamous blue tarps and cover the holes, you have a house that is just fine and people can live in there with no problem. This house is only missing siding. The windows and doors are still in place. This house, while it itself does not have water, the water that is in the streets may impact the ability of the sewers to operate, so maybe people can't stay in the house because of that, but the house itself is fine. And of course, there are always forms. Now then, on CERT forms, you will find that depending upon where you are, your CERT form may be different. FEMA says this is the form to use. We find it wanting in the information. The people in California use this form. We find they're wasting space. We still can't get the information we want. So we developed this form that you have. We kind of felt like it took the best of everything. This is the one that we use in Kansas City. You are more than welcome to use this form anywhere you want. It is not copyrighted by any stretch of the imagination. This is the CERT wind chill damage assessment form that we are using. On this form, you will see over on the corner, right under the date, you see a reminder of what kinds of damage can happen and a number to use as an indicator. Okay, on the back of that page, you will see space for your notations and special notes, as well as reminders that deal mainly with floods and separates the mobile homes from the homes and tells you how much water can be in that structure to determine the designation. Here's an example of a form that has been filled out, and you can see it's a mixture of buildings, civic buildings, parks, and homes. And on the back, we wanted to make notations. The number on the line is the same as the number on the front of the sheet. Now we've seen the forms, so let's take a look at the different kinds of damage you might see based on the kind of disaster. High wind events can really do strange things, so never underestimate the power of the wind. Tornadoes, very destructive. In this picture, I have been trying to decide if that debris field is a home that was previously there or if it has blown in from a house somewhere else. This house is probably just minor or affected. I see shingles off, but I see windows that are still in place. This house would only be affected. Electricity is still on. There may be some wind damage, but it is quite possible that people could just continue staying in this home. Here you see an example of streetlights being non-functioning. That is something that you as a CERT person would be reporting. Straight line winds cause a lot of damage. We would not be concerned about the truck in itself. However, the fact that the branch came off of this tree may be an indication that there are branches down elsewhere, such as in this park, where they are down and may interfere with our ability to use it. With hurricanes, you get a wide variety of damages. Here we can see the damage that resulted from the flood surge. The water came in, and as it went out, it made a clean slate of everything. You also have the storm surges that come up. This was Hurricane Sandy on the beach. But with hurricanes, you also get fire. The fire started and there was no way to get to this area to put it out. I'm sure you all saw that on the news. With hurricanes, you also get tornadoes. Clearly, these buildings were hit by a tornado and destroyed. Ice storms. Ice is a very destructive storm, and you can see that streets are frequently blocked, and as the trees come down, they will take the utilities with them. The Great Ice Storm of 1998 involved all of Maine, a large part of Canada. There were people who were without power for up to a month because of this ice storm. Just the weight of the ice caused these transoms to break. If you were to look out your window and see this, you would report that the street is totally blocked. Trees down, very common when it comes to ice. And fires, believe it or not, can be caused by ice. When the ice brings down the electrical lines, they're live, and sometimes fires do start. Ice is deceivingly heavy. A ½ inch of ice weighs 3.5 pounds. So over a 300-foot span, which is normal between electrical poles, that adds over 1,000 pounds to that wire, so you can understand why it breaks. If a drought occurs, you may be asked to go out and just assess the general extent of the damage. You will see crops that are destroyed, lakes that are dried up, cattle and other livestock that is stressed, as well as pastures that no longer have the grass to sustain them. And in city reservoirs, you will see very low water. This water was clearly supposed to be at least 3 feet higher. You will also see foundation problems, brick cracking, where also the foundation's cracking, and also where the house is pulling away from structures such as chimneys. And don't forget that drought is a perfect setup for wildfires. And earthquakes. Let me make it clear, do not think that you do not live in an earthquake zone. What you see here, these numbers, like this one's 5.35, that is the average earthquake strength that they have had in the last 30 years. On this map, the little blue dots are nuclear facilities. The orange dots are where seismic activity has occurred. So something's going to happen at some point, and we're all going to have to deal with it. Something to keep in mind. I think I'm going to move to right here. Mackay, Idaho, 1983. This is recent. Soil liquidation. This is a common occurrence when an earthquake occurs. It just liquefies the soil. Fault lines can be seen. In some cases, they open up. This one is the San Francisco earthquake. But when you have these fault lines, if there's a building built over it, you can imagine what's going to happen to it. This is Seward, Alaska, or what was left after it. In 1969, the strongest earthquake measured in North America occurred in Seward. It lasted for 3 minutes. It was a 9.2 on the Richter scale. It was actually felt around the world. After the earthquake stopped, there were 2 tsunamis that came in. They were about 30 minutes apart. And the second one was going over 100 miles an hour when it hit the city and washed over 100 people out to sea. Downtown Anchorage, the same earthquake. And you can imagine trying to get emergency vehicles through this area. The San Francisco earthquake in 1989. After the earthquake stopped, there were big fires, and it was very difficult to put them out because the same shaking that ruins the buildings also ruins the utilities. In 1906, San Francisco had a large earthquake we all know about, but it burned for 3 days because they did not have the water to put it out. over 250,000 people were left homeless. The New Madrid earthquake. New Madrid, we hear about it. It happened in the 1800s. We think of it as being this massive thing, and it was, but it was actually 3 earthquakes that happened just one right after the other, going up the Mississippi River. This shows you, we always think of the San Francisco quake as being terrible, and it was, but you look at the scope of how much area felt New Madrid. There are lakes in Tennessee that were formed when New Madrid happened. The New Madrid fault will cause another earthquake, and most likely, no matter where you are, you will feel it. Hopefully, it won't be too bad, and the little tremors between now and then will release some of the energy. But not all earthquakes are big. Seattle, Washington in 1965, serious disruption to transportation. You would not be getting very much down these railroad tracks. Charleston, South Carolina, you can see where all the front fell off of the buildings. Montana, the house in the back broken in half. Maybe the soil in front was liquefied. Kalamazoo, Michigan, and southern Illinois. Earthquakes happen everywhere. So, as in doing damage assessment, as in all things CERT, there is safety first. Always wear your personal protection equipment and wear proper footwear. And please do not wear flip-flops to do damage assessment. Do not wear flip-flops. Wear something that's got a nice thick sole. If you have steel-toed boots, wear them. You are going out where the least you could do is get ptomaine poisoning from stepping on a nail. Always employ the buddy system and don't go it alone. It does us no good if you're out doing damage assessment and we have to come rescue you. Protect yourself from the elements, both the hot and the cold. Do not drive across or step on downed power lines, even if you are sure that they are dead. And if you are walking through an area, keep your eyes open because they can be pulled off the back of homes and other structures as well as out of the trees and across the streets. This photograph makes me think of my mother. Because you know how mothers are. You come in, Mom, I want to go. No, you can't go. But all my friends are going. If all your friends jumped off the cliff, would you go with them? If you see one car drive through high water, is it safe to drive through high water? It is not. It only takes 6 inches of water to take a SUV off a road. So if you're driving anything lighter than an SUV and some of these smart cars, they could probably only withstand about 2 inches. So do not drive through high water. I don't care what the guy in front of you is doing. Do not enter unsafe structures. If you think you hear somebody calling for help, call 911 and report it. Do not go in the structures yourselves. And be aware of your surroundings. This car in the middle of the street was probably driving right down the street when that tree fell over. The events, just because the sleet has stopped falling, doesn't mean that the damage has stopped occurring. And if it's in this kind of a situation where you have some sort of a chemical fire, a change in wind direction could put you right into the path of the danger. So be aware. So a quick review. Disasters are sudden, calamitous, and they exceed a community's ability to cope using its own resources. Your role as CERT is to do a quick damage assessment on which you write legibly, and it's clear and concise. Your damage assessment is the foundation for determining what is needed to respond and for federal funding. Follow the guidelines, write legibly, and always remember safety first. Use the damage assessment forms that you are given, and even though they may look different, they're all going to ask for the same kind of information. And if possible, keep a copy for your own records.